Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast, supported by Museum Development North and Arts Council England.
Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Les Willans. If you recall, at the end of the last episode, Les was getting to grips with taking on a people management role as a team leader. In 1988, he finds himself supervising a team of designers working on the fixed leading edge structure between the inboard and outboard engines on the Airbus A340. This may not be an aircraft that you immediately associate with the Avro Heritage story. Les outlines the close liaison work that was needed with the British Aerospace site at Filton as a key part of this work. You will hear how this involved Les regularly flying down to Filton on an HS-125 and how he nearly didn't get back on one occasion. What also comes across is the incredible complexity of the aviation design, engineering and production process, with so many signatures from different sections required to grant authorisation at different stages. You'll also hear of Les's first period of work on the advanced turboprop and his success in reducing manufacturing costs. And he later talks about 9/11 and the devastating effect that this had on the aviation industry. But Les starts off by explaining a little bit about the context of the British aviation industry in the late 1980s and how it was that work on the Airbus A340 came to Woodford.
You have to look at the organisation, really, of the company. In essence, the design office really was like a subcontract department almost. The management were looking at ways to find jobs for people so they were looking at a 5-year plan of forward workload. And so somewhere along the way, there was going to be there was a gap in the workload. And so they were looking to fill that gap. And so there would have been senior management meetings with other parts of the business, and Airbus was one of those parts of the business that was seeking to find people to fill a workload plan of their own, which happened to be on the A340 and the A330. And we got a package of work which involved part of the fixed leading edge of the A340, 330 wing. Airbus themselves had the very inboard section. We had the middle section between the two engines, and Prestwick engineering department had the outboard section of it. And so we had to go through a process of producing what's called scheme drawings, which is a base outline of what the workload was going to entail, where all the component parts fitted, and we produced on a single sheet of drawing paper or film the main fixed points on the leading edge, which were the slat trap ribs. So it had a leading edge slat that moved in and out into the wind surface. So on an aircraft you have leading edge slats and you have trailing edge flaps. And so this was it incorporated the moving slats. So there was a gap, if you like, in the middle between two ribs. And we had to go round asking me and others had to go around asking the people at Filton where they put in all these holes. And I kept getting asked, what are you asking me for? So in a design office, you've got basically sections of people doing different jobs. You have a structures department, structures section, you have a systems section, you have an electrical section and a trim section. So any of those people would be setting out their part of the design, going through the length of the wing. And so obviously they put in a space, allocating themselves a space. And I'm saying, well, I've got a piece of structure. I want to know where the hole is in my piece of structure. And that's when I realised that the working practices at Filton were completely different to the working practices at Woodford. We were like a whole body of people. We were all in the same office, but we all had the same outlook.
So this project, the work going on here, but you visit Filton?
We were filtered on a fairly regular basis to get these scheme drawings authorised. So they would take a view of it and say, yeah, we think you need to do this or you need to do that. So we sometimes used to send the files electronically down to Filton for them to view, and other times we'd have to take them down to get them signed. So we'd have to have a bodily signature on the drawing from one of their designers to okay it, so that we could progress to the next level. So you go through a stage of birth, if you like, to growth. So you could start at that level.
Well, so this is a pan-European project.
Yes, it is. No, it's not British Aerospace. This is French as well. So it's made in. So we would be making the wings at Chester. So the workload was split between all these three entities: France, England, and Germany. I think it was in Italy. I think in some sections. But to save time getting to Filton, we had to go to Chester to get the company shuttle. So there was a company shuttle used to take us from the Chester side to flown down by the company shuttle, which was a HS-125. One day one afternoon we were waiting to get ready to go, and somebody came along and said, "Oh, you can't go home tonight in the shuttle." We were all like, "What? What do you mean can't go home tonight?" Well, one of the managements has commandeered the seats in the shuttle, and he wants to go to Hatfield. I said, "We can't do that. We can't get a car at this time of day. We've got no clothes. We can't stop overnight in a hotel. We need to do something about this." And we're looking at what's time's passing by, and there's people talking amongst themselves outside of our realm of authority. Next thing we said, "Yeah, we're all right. We've got a seat on the aircraft." So somebody said to me, "Well, but Les, you've got to sit in the jump seat. Are you all right with that?" I said, "Yeah, of course I am." So we get on the aircraft. I said, "Well, where's the jump seat?" "Well, you're sat on the floor on this seat between the two pilots, behind the two pilots." And that's how I had to sit all the whole way back to Chester, sat on the floor on this seat that had been temporarily bolted to the floor. Yeah, and all my view was of the legs of the pilots and the co-pilot and all the way home.
Yeah, I'm glad you told that bit of the story, Les. I think people coming to the museum won't always associate Airbus.
No, they don't. It was quite part of the getting the workload done was because we had to then work with people at Mawson's who did all the detailed drawing work for us. So we provided all the background scheme drawings and said, "This is what you need to provide." We did a lot of the critical work in deciding how many parts we needed to make and could we rationalise on component parts to try to cut down on the workload. So we sort of tabulated little brackets that went along the length of the structure to make them unique in a way that they could make so many bits fit in different places. And they went along that route and they produced these detailed drawings and assembly drawings for us, and I signed them off. So I got what they call an authority signature. So the sort of way you went through processing design is you get signatures on the end result. So there's a check signature, there's a design or authorisation signature, there's usually an aerodynamic awaits, and a stress signature also goes on these documentation on a block on the corner of the drawing with all the other information.
1990, Les, a new role comes and a change of venue because you go to the factory at Chadderton.
Yes.
17 miles away.
Yeah.
And you return to ATP. And your role was cost reduction team leader.
Yes.
How did that work?
Well, I think at this point in the life of the aircraft, they recognised that the cost of building the aircraft was getting out of control effectively, and so I think the basic selling price of the aircraft was something like £8 million. And they're supposed to turn a profit on that, and they were making 8 sets of aircraft. That was the plan, 8 sets of aircraft a year. And so Chadderton themselves asked for a small design team to assist in identifying component parts that could be easily redesigned, stroke changed at a small cost to benefit the business. And
so the idea is to get the cost down.
The manufacturing department highlighted an issue with a component part. So they'd been fudging the item by finding the centre of the hole. So they'd got a program that they'd designed. Instead of working to the drawing, they'd made it up as they went along and put a hole in the middle of the object. And it was a forged component. The bottom line is, when I got the original drawing that was supplied by the forging company to us, nobody had taken account of the tolerances on the component between the centres of the object. And when you took all these different component dimensions into account, there wasn't enough material on the component part to make it. So then we had to increase the size of the forged component to be able to make this part to the drawing standards that we produced, which meant getting the stress departments involved. We also changed some other components to dimensions to be able to use a milling cutter that was a standard size cutter. And ultimately, the issue was that when they were producing in the first place, each item had to be concessed, which was meant it had to be approved as an unconformed part. And it had a red label stuck on it till it was approved to be used. At the end of the day, when we'd finished all the design, and then they manufactured the first one. And one morning, I was walking around Chadderton, and this guy, one of the production managers, walked past me with this in his hand with a big grin on his face. I said, "What's up with you?" He said, "This is the first component we've got through the process where it's been passed without any problems." And then I was asked after that issue to try and work out how much we'd saved. So I just made an assessment of how many it took to make one component part, and out of a batch of 8 components, one component was always just about passed through inspection. So you're manufacturing 8 parts, scrapping 7 to get 1, and so it was something like £250,000 saving. So the management said, "Oh, well, that's all right then." So that was one item, and we hadn't done it all on our own. We were it was a collaborative effect, between the NC programmers and production engineering and stress department and the designers and thinking of ways around. And I suppose it made me realise that the way we'd started the job, was given out to different people in the office, and the people who did this component part weren't structures part people. They were on the systems department or the systems group in the office. So they were just doing what they thought was best, if you like, and didn't have the understanding that I had about, you've got to go back to basics, and you've got to think about how big is this component going to be, and what's the smallest it's got to be, and so you've got a volume of material you need to provide, and that was the first time I've ever come across something like that.
In this period, as you were dealing with WQNs and
works query notes, those are things that well, basically, they're either requests for design change or errors on the job the manufacturing department have found. So they're instigated by the production department, and then they're sent to us to get an answer on it. We provide an answer in the design department of how to change the drawing, put information on that the issue is whether we agree with it or not. So if we agree with the request, which we put a change on that request, and then that goes through as an official change to the component part, and we issue a modification number to it. So we write all the information on there to enable the drawings to be changed at a future date, as though we were doing it at that time. So you have to think about how many drawings need to be changed from the detail stage, if it's a detail part, to a sub-assembly or a complete assembly. And so you have to go through the logical steps all the way from the bottom to the top, listing all those changes that need to take place. And that's that. So you can end up with umpteen of these coming in daily, and there's probably, I would say on a daily basis, there probably was at least a dozen a day used to come in from the shop floor that needed to be answered on a regular basis, and they wouldn't all be done by me. I would hand them out randomly to some of the design staff, and then we'd have to go through the stress department to say whether they approved the change as well, or maybe ask for advice from them as to how we might go forward.
And once resolved, these would make a big difference.
They did, yeah. At some point, because of the way we were conducting ourselves, we decided that we'd issue all these changes on one particular modification number so that we could make a list of all these component parts and all these design changes. So in the future, all the people would need to do was to get all the documentation associated with all these changes all in one batch, and they could do all the changes to all the drawings at any one time, so they had all the information available. And this became quite apparent that when the ATP project moved to Prestwick, and people from Prestwick came to us and said, "What information do we need?" And that's when they said, "Oh, you'll need all this." And they went, "Jesus Christ, how are we going to do all that work?" So, "Well, how do you think we went on? We've had to compile all this information, and now you're going to have to do all the physical changes to the drawings. You've got to go through all this. Production planning have already had to go through all this in their way. They've got all their documentation. It's all got fitted to the aircraft. So you're going to have to find a way of spending money doing the physical changes to the drawings if you want to bring them all up to date." And we left them to it. But subsequent rumours that spread after the event was that all of the drawings that went left Woodford Woodford was stuck in a hangar untouched. So we don't know whether anything was ever done about it. But they did change the design of it. They called it something else. They called it a Jetstream 61, I think they called it, when they got design authority for the aircraft, and they changed all the seating and made it a bit cheaper. It didn't look as like the aircraft we'd left Woodford, but I think at the end of the day, I think it didn't get the customer base because it was overtaken by other companies.
So in the 90s, as the name Avro comes back.
Yeah, it did. That was all to do with the separation of the business between Prestwick taking the ATP, Woodford getting design authority for the 146, and proposed tie-up with the Taiwanese government to make a jet. So they had to separate the business. So the military aircraft business went from Woodford to Chadderton. So they didn't want anything to do with the military business on site, so they couldn't steal any technical data from us. So that's how all the business was separated. But then at that point, they wanted to change the name back to Avro, and it became Avro International. But then the money was never forthcoming from the Taiwanese government. So basically that business effectively floundered and fell flat, and went on to do other things after that.
Yeah. So the aircraft is a variation of the 146. It's called Avro RJ.
So after that sort of fell flat, there was like, well, what can we do now? So they decided that continuing on the theme of cost reduction effectively. And so we were looking at re-looking at components that had been designed by Hatfield, de Havilland, and going through things like change of material from small items that were made out of magnesium alloy and making them making them out of a machine part in aluminium alloy, so thereby reducing material costs and manufacturing costs, down to making common components between the three variations of the aircraft. So you've got an RJ70, an RJ85 and an RJ100, and in some cases parts on the aircraft could have been common to all three variants when they weren't, and they were all specifically designed for each variant. So we were tasked with going through each of these things, these suggestions, and seeing whether it was feasible to do it. And in some cases they were, and some cases they weren't. So if you, as an example, head office at Farnborough gave each of the big sections of the aircraft a price that they had to stick to. So, for example, Filton manufactured the centre section of the 146, and they were given approximately £1 million to spend on that section of the aeroplane, and actually it was costing them more than £1 million to make. So that was each section of the aircraft was given a separate budget by head office, so that we were got to try and get their budget down to within that, and that was an ongoing task until they realised that they were going to run out of customers, and the business was changing, and nobody was wanting to buy the aircraft anymore. And it was not feasible for the company to reach that goal. And then effectively almost the business almost closed down. And then at some point decided they wanted to make a variant of it in collaboration with Allied Signal in 1999. They set up this new business with customers and designed something called an RJX, which is a new engine by Allied Signal, which is a more efficient version of the AFCO Lycoming engine that had on the original aircraft. And it was going to give more performance, better fuel consumption, and reduce costs for seat per mile, as they called it, for operating costs. So we got to a point where we'd actually got a new aircraft built and ready for a launch customer, and 9/11 happened. Worldwide, it had a real disaster with all manufacturers with aircraft, and the Americans particularly were not very happy in flying in smaller aircraft. I don't know why, because the 146 was designed as a big cabin look-alike, if you like, similar to 737s and things like that, which they already flew. But, the Americans. And so effectively that spelt the end of that project. And then it was stuck in limbo, really.
I think was the last British
built, yeah, effectively, yeah. So I think it was I think really that was, you could really see from our point of view the sort of beginning of the end of the business. I think even the head office must have seen that the business was not going to last much longer, and things were, redundancy packages were ongoing for many years.
Not the brightest of times.
Not really, no.
thank you to Les for the second part of our conversation. We did end on a downbeat note there, with Les referring to the beginning of the end. And as it turned out, in many respects, he was right about that. But all was not lost just yet. And in the next episode, we find Les working on the vertical tail of an aircraft that very few people would realise is part of the Woodford story. Don't forget that if you follow or subscribe to the podcast and you have push notifications switched on, then you should get an alert telling you when that episode is released, and you can find out exactly what the aircraft in question was. I do hope you join us for that. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and of each other. And it's bye for now from me, Chris Bezic.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.